Good morning, everyone. I think we should get started. I'm Lusimbo Tofuda. I'm from the IMF External Relations Department, and I would like to welcome all of you to this press conference on the launch of the Fall 2007 of the Sub-Saharan African Regional Economic Outlook. Mr. Gichane and his colleagues will be conducting this press conference, and I would like to introduce them to you. To my immediate right is Benedict Christensen, who is the head of the policy wing in the African department. Mr. Gichane is indeed the director of that department. To his right is Tom Krieger, who is also deputy director in the same department, senior advisor, in the same department. And we have at the far end Saul Lizondo, who is deputy director also in the African department. Mr. Gichane will have a few opening remarks, and then the team will be ready to take your questions. I would like to mention that this is a 40 to 45 minute exercise. We can't go beyond that for time constraints. Indeed, as usual, before asking your question, please identify yourself, and then we can proceed. Translation is indeed available. We have English indeed on channel 4, Spanish on channel 3, I think. Yes. Thank you, Mr. Gichane. You have the floor.
Thank you, Lucy. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this press conference on the African Regional Outlook. Let me, before taking some of your questions, elaborate on the report that we are issuing today. This fall issue of the Regional Outlook is indeed a very good one. The region's prospect looks very strong. We expect economic growth to be about 6% this year, and our forecast is for 2008 around 7%. And so this will extend the period of very high growth performance for 3-4 years now. And in recent years, the region has seen indeed its strongest growth rate and the lowest inflation rate in more than 3 decades. And obviously, internal as well as external factors are here playing. On the internal front, it's clear that the African economic policies are far better than in the past. Deficits are going down. Inflation is going down, and as I just said, growth rate is picking up based on those strong policies. On the other side, it's also true that external factors are playing. We've obviously first financing both private and public going to Africa. External debts granted to several African countries, and also finally commodity prices going up. And this has really indeed helped the countries generate more resources, but also use those resources in support of the highest growth we've witnessed in Africa in the latest years. And therefore, the region looks well poised to sustain its growth momentum. Historically, because of both commodity price swing and overshocks, as well as institutional weaknesses, growth episodes in sub-Saharan Africa have often ended with a dramatic collapse in output. This time, though, many oil exporters have benefited from oil prices, high oil prices, have saved most of the windfall, and have also improved their policies. I think Nigeria is really one of the best case story in this group of countries. On the other side, many other countries are also contributing to this growth, even when prices of their exports and imports have adversely affected them. This strong growth in the region reflects also the fruit of institutional improvements. Structural reforms and more rigorous economic policies that have started to bear fruit in many countries. The number of armed conflict also and political crises have diminished, and also it's also clearly playing to support the policies and also the institutional changes. With better economic conditions and greater stability, investment also, of course, both in domestic and external, are increasing and helping countries to support their growth momentum. Obviously, as you can see in many countries, this growth rate is certainly not sufficient to help them reach the MDGs, and therefore the challenge is there, not only to sustain that growth rate but also to accelerate it to reach a higher level. There are, of course, risks, and the first risk is really coming from the global outlook. As you saw in the recent weeks, things can change, and has changed indeed, and obviously this could affect, particularly if commodity prices are being affected, this could affect the growth momentum in the continent. But of course, to generate more growth and to sustain the recent growth surge, things need to be done. And I want to finish this presentation with these issues. Clearly, sustaining the current expansion and reducing poverty ultimately depend on each country's policy and the ability of the government to conduct and pursue the structural reform agenda in their own countries. In that front, I'd like to mention first that while some countries still need to bring stability to their economies, notably the countries emerging from conflict, most others need to consolidate the stabilization that have happened in their countries, and we see many examples where this has certainly been achieved, and obviously the challenge there is to continue and sustain those policies. Second, countries must use fiscal space efficiently to provide better services, particularly health, education, water, sanitation, and obviously continue improving the infrastructure in the countries. Third, countries should try to reduce the cost of doing business. It's clear that the challenge is there. The recent report published by the World Bank, while showing that some of the countries have made tremendous progress, particularly Kenya and Ghana, most of the African countries still need to improve the environment for private sector development, and I think it can be done as shown by those two countries, and our advice is that with the help of the World Bank and with the help of the IFC, this can be done, and we urge countries to seize that opportunity. Fourth, countries have to put the domestic pool of saving and efficient financial system to work so they can foster private investment, and we are committed to that. We have launched recently an initiative with our bank colleagues to assist in that, and obviously countries can seize that opportunity, and we are there for that. Finally, fifth and finally, countries should aim to regain their share in global trade, not only through greater market access, but also by reducing trade barriers and non-trade barriers as well. And I think that's one of the greatest challenges we face in the continent, how to put the trade agenda at the forefront of the economic programs, and use that to seize the global momentum going on currently. This is the conclusion of the recommendation we'd like to make at the end of this presentation, and of course I'm ready to take your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bichane. Before we take your questions, I would like to also welcome those watching this briefing online through the online media briefing center of the fund, and ask them to submit questions at this point. Now the floor is open. Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm John Gizzi, political editor of Human Events, and I noticed the last time that my question was transcribed at one of these forums, they didn't get the last name, so it's Gizzi for the record. I have two questions about the entertainer Bono, who was here earlier in the week. One, he was highly critical of international banking outlets for not forgiving loans that had been made to Liberia. And this was covered, given what I thought was very substantial coverage in the Financial Times yesterday. The other thing is that Bono has urged other countries, particularly the United States, to join his Program 1, which would bring tax dollars to Africa for work on poverty programs and other things that private organizations historically have worked on. Is the one program something the group is familiar with and endorses as well? More tax dollars from Western countries for relief in Africa and dealing with poverty. Thank you.
Well, let me say that, John, I clearly shared some of the comments you made in support of the for debt relief to Liberia. And indeed, as far as the IMF is concerned, we are working hard to achieve that. And specifically to the question of the related to Bono's reaction, we've responded to him. The managing director has indeed responded, sent a letter to Bono, assuring him that this is indeed an issue that we are actively seeking to address. We have indeed, our management have indeed written to all the member countries, asking them to provide additional resources that will help clear the arrears toward the IMF. And that clearly will allow Liberia not only to access that debt relief, but also to get additional resources from the World Bank, the African Development Bank, and certainly finish with that round of debt relief and help the country achieve its development agenda. So I clearly share the concern you raise, and I want to assure you that we're working hard on that.
The lady in the middle.
Good morning. My name is Adam Willigan with the Washington Bureau Chief of the African Sun Times. Mr. Biochane, there is this in the Francophone area, they are worried about the devaluation of the CFA franc. Can you just give us your input in that? If the CFA franc is devaluated, to whom that would profit? And the governor of the Bank of France said that it's not for the devaluation of the CFA franc. And the president of Bongo, Elijah Omar Bongo, said that if you devalue the CFA franc, it will have to make its own currency. So what is your assessment on that? Do you think devaluating the CFA franc can profit the CFA zone?
Well, I just want to recognize the statement you just quoted by the governor of Banque de France. There are several other authorities, including the president of Gabon, who has spoken on that, and I don't want to say more than what they said. As far as we are concerned, the issue is not on our agenda. But at the same time, there are competitiveness issues that could be addressed differently. Exchange rate is one instrument among others, and so I think, as the authorities stated, they are tackling the competitiveness issues differently. So I just want to take stock of what the authorities managing that currency said, and I think we should proceed on that basis.
There's a question here.
Bonjour, je m'appelle Salif Sanogo, je viens de la télévision malienne. Je me permettrai juste de rebondir sur cette question, puisqu'on l'a dit, le FMI donne des conseils avisés, et l'autre jour, le directeur général sortant l'a dit, et la crédibilité du FMI dépendra surtout de la qualité des conseils qu'il aura à donner à certains États. Et aujourd'hui, on parle effectivement d'une éventualité de dévaluation du franc CFA. On sait que le CFA est arrimé à l'euro, or aujourd'hui, l'euro est de plus en plus fort par rapport au dollar. Or, les balances commerciales des pays africains sont déterminées en dollars. Est-ce que quelque part, aujourd'hui, vous l'avez dit, il y a des meilleures conditions économiques et surtout il y a la stabilité qui revient, ce qui booste la croissance, qui n'est pas totalement suffisante. Est-ce qu'aujourd'hui, en cas de dévaluation quelque part, cela ne va-t-il pas compromettre tous les efforts faits par ces pays africains-là?
Bien, je vais vous dire, répéter peut-être d'une autre manière ce que j'ai dit à votre collègue tout à l'heure, qui est que les autorités de la région et les autorités françaises qui sont concernées par cette monnaie disent que la dévaluation du franc CFA n'est pas dans leur agenda économique. Je crois qu'il faut en prendre acte. Mais en même temps, comme vous dites, c'est un problème économique. La dévaluation ou le taux de change est un instrument dans la panoplie des instruments économiques et financiers disponibles pour les États. Notamment pour faire face aux problèmes de compétitivité. Il y a d'autres aspects de la compétitivité qui peuvent être, disons, attaqués, qui doivent être attaqués, notamment le marché du travail, le coût de la main-d'œuvre, les facteurs de production et autres, le coût de l'énergie. Et donc, les autorités, effectivement, peuvent choisir de s'attaquer au problème de la compétitivité de cette autre manière. Et donc je crois qu'il faut prendre acte de leur engagement à attaquer ces problèmes économiques et ces problèmes de compétitivité de cette manière plutôt que sur le taux de change. Je crois que je ne peux pas aller au-delà de cette position-là.
We are going to take a question from the Online Media Briefing Center from Reuters, South Africa. The question reads as follows. Do you foresee the situation in Zimbabwe stifling economic growth among her neighbors? Could you elaborate on how traditional trade patterns have been disrupted by the Zimbabwe crisis? This is from Reuters, South Africa.
Well, first let me say that we are quite concerned about what's going on in Zimbabwe. And we've discussed that several times, including in South Africa, including recently when we had a meeting with the African Caucus in Mozambique. And what we are clearly seeing that, yes, the trade pattern is clearly being affected by what's going on. You have more than 2 million Zimbabweans living currently in other southern African countries, including in South Africa. And what we're advising the country authorities to do is to tackle the current problem by putting in place a comprehensive package of policies, which should include fiscal policies, quasi-fiscal policies, exchange rate policies, and obviously some measures on the structural side, including liberalization of the exchange rates, liberalization of the prices, but also addressing property right issues. So I think the situation is dramatic. It's a great concern, not just to us, but to many friends of Zimbabwe. And but at the same time, the encouraging thing is that we know the solution. And so when the political situation will be sufficiently addressed, and I hope this will happen soon, the players will clearly be able to address it. We know the problems. We also know the solutions, and therefore, I think it's up to the country authorities to move on that.
Question here, please.
Merci, Malik Sebougomina, je viens du Bénin. Vous avez demandé à ce que les pays en développement puissent s'efforcer dans leur part dans le commerce international. Soit, c'est une bonne chose, mais lorsque il y a 20 000 agriculteurs de la Californie qui sont subventionnés par le gouvernement américain, producteurs de coton, ils ont l'irrigation, ils ont les pesticides, ils ont les herbicides, et on vient les subventionner, et cela fait que sur le marché international, ils viennent fausser le prix du coton par rapport aux milliers de cultivateurs béninois, maliens, tchadiens, burkinabés. Est-ce que déjà on ne doit pas chercher une plus grande équité au niveau du commerce mondial au lieu de demander aux autres de faire des efforts qui ne pourront pas être prospérants sur le marché international? Merci.
Oui, merci Malik. Je crois que il y a deux aspects de votre question. Le premier aspect, c'est les subventions internationales. Et nous avons, ce n'est pas un secret, ce n'est pas nouveau. Le Fonds monétaire international a toujours appelé et continue d'appeler à l'élimination et à la réduction au moins drastique de ces subventions qui perturbent le commerce international. Donc c'est un appel que nous avons lancé, que nous continuons de lancer. Cela dit, c'est aussi important pour les Africains et pour les gouvernements africains de moderniser le secteur agricole et en particulier la filière du coton. Vous avez vous-même dans votre intervention parlé des intrants, parlé de la modernisation de la production de coton dans ces pays, aux États-Unis notamment. Je crois que les producteurs de coton africains doivent aller également dans cette direction. Je dis que la solution également va vers un meilleur rendement de la production de coton africain. Il faut aller au-delà, bien sûr, de la production de 800 kilos à l'hectare de coton, au-delà de 1 tonne de coton à l'hectare, parce que c'est là que la solution va se trouver. Parce qu'aujourd'hui, à la limite, si cette subvention était éliminée, je ne suis pas sûr que les bénéficiaires seront les producteurs de coton de l'Afrique de l'Ouest. Donc, il y a un effort à faire de part et d'autre, et c'est le moment de le dire.
Let me take another question online. This is from Nigeria, from the news agency of Nigeria. Does the IMF think that Nigeria's vision of becoming one of the top 20 economies in the world by 2020 is achievable? What recommendations does the IMF have to make this vision realistic in terms of macroeconomic policies?
So?
You want me to repeat the question maybe? So?
Yes, please.
Okay. Does the IMF think that Nigeria's vision of becoming one of the top 20 economies in the world by 2020 is achievable? What recommendations does the fund have to make this vision realistic in terms of macroeconomic policies?
Okay. I think it's very difficult to forecast from now whether Nigeria is going to be able to be one of the 20 economies, by in a so distant period. At the same time, one has to recognize that Nigeria has been growing and strongly, and now has the resources, additional resources, consequence of high oil prices, and is adopting the correct policies in macroeconomic policies, also in terms of structural policies. Undoubtedly, continuation with this type of policy will result in continuous growth in Nigeria, and probably will increase and raise the position of Nigeria with respect to other countries.
There's a question in the back over there. Micro, please. Excuse me? Yes.
Hi, Daniel Kalinaji from the East African in Kampala, Uganda. There has been considerable concern about China's, activities in Africa. That many African countries that have benefited from debt relief are taking on new debts from China. Yet this Chinese investment is helping many of these countries close the infrastructure gap. What practical measures does the IMF recommend to African countries in their engagement with China to ensure that it's a win-win situation, but that they do not erode the fiscal gains that they've achieved over the last decade? Thank you.
Well, I think you've presented the question in, I believe, the best way we can respond to it, because your question includes the response at the same time. Because for one, I think we should welcome China's financing in Africa, because the continent needs resources, and it should come obviously both from traditional donors and from emerging donors like China, but others. At the same time, I believe it should be a win-win situation, in a sense that those loans, those financing should not create down the road the same situation we are just exiting from. I mean, unsustainable debt. And therefore, I think the only way we see it is for the countries, but also for the Chinese authorities, to use the debt sustainability framework that we have just designed with the World Bank and us in 2005, and we updated it last year. And this is an instrument that could help countries assess where they are, and help also the emerging creditors and all the creditors indeed look at what could be the consequence of their own activities, and particularly their lending activities in a country. And so to summarize our position, I'll say that one, we welcome China's involvement in Africa. Second, we believe it should be a win-win situation both for China and African countries. And third, we should make sure that the lending activities will not lead to unsustainable debt in the near future. And of course, because of that, we should use all the instruments available, and we are offering an instrument in that regard.
There's a question here. Excuse me, sir.
Je suis Didier Moussala Bouakassa, journaliste de la RDC, journal L'Observateur. Ma question est simple. Monsieur Tchane a souligné que la fin des conflits dans beaucoup de pays a permis le retour de la stabilité macroéconomique et de la croissance. Je voudrais savoir quelles sont les actions qu'ils entrevoient au niveau de l'IFMI pour soutenir les pays post-conflit afin qu'ils ne retombent pas dans la guerre et consolident la stabilité macroéconomique et la stabilité politique. Merci.
In terms of how we generally help countries in post-conflict situations, I think the immediate issue is to rebuild the capacity of the country or the government to be able to perform rudimentary economic policies. We help countries to, first in terms of capacity building, so rebuild capacity in the central bank, in the Ministry of Finance, for instance in the Ministry of Finance, by putting in place ways to generate revenue to sustain at least the most minimum basic expenditures that need to be conducted in the immediate post-conflict situation. Then the second thing we are doing is we give policy advice to the authorities in terms of putting in place a macroeconomic framework, so meaning a budget framework, monetary policy framework, and usually that involves also putting in place monetary policies that reduce the rate of inflation that sometimes have gone out of control in countries that are subject to conflict. We think it's very important in order to prevent the reemergence of conflict that there is relative price stability, also usually that's also associated with exchange rate stability, at least more than was in the past. So this, based on this framework, then we encourage donors to come in and support the countries. We have more concretely an instrument available in the fund that deals with post-conflict assistance. That is countries that are not yet ready to implement policies supported by our other arrangements that we provide for in the fund can make use of such kind of facilities. I mean, currently, for instance, Côte d'Ivoire has it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. My name is Tamrat, and I work for a weekly business paper in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. I just want to ask a follow-up question to this Chinese issue. There are two elements in there. One, the new thinking within the Chinese government that they're not actually seeing the creditworthiness of countries at the moment, but rather they look at their potential in the future, a potential which could or could not come. And how would you view that? That they base their decision to provide concessional loans to African countries on the basis of something that may or may not come in the future. And second, the competitiveness of international companies when they come to Africa and bid for major infrastructure projects. There appears to be no international tender or international bidding because the Chinese government provides the foreign currency or the money for the project, and therefore African countries would not have any choice but to award the project to whoever the Chinese company is. And many of the other companies from other countries, whether it's Europe or the US or elsewhere, are completely excluded from such infrastructural contracts in Africa. Thank you.
Well, I just don't know if how the Chinese authorities and what's the basis of the decision in going to a country or another. I'm not even sure that what you are alluding to is true. But what I know is that China has been in Africa for a long time. I think if you look historically at the relation between China and the African countries, including in some countries that have fought liberation wars, China has been in those countries. And so I'm not sure that the assumption behind the relation between China and one specific country is based on what you said, on the potential of that country today or in the future. And indeed, if you look at the relation between China and the individual African countries today, China is almost in all the countries. So I think that one is pretty much clear. The second aspect of your question is of course, very important. And it's related to the value of money of all the investment African countries are conducting. And of course, in that regard, I believe there should be a competitive procurement process when a particular investment is to be conducted. And of course, because of the link between the financing and that particular investment, it has happened frequently that that specific financing is clearly related to a roads, energy supply, or any other particular investment. Of course, our call is here that there should be a competitive business, and because that's the only way you can make sure that there is value for money in a particular investment. But that call is toward the Chinese authorities, but it's also a call to all the other investors, whether it's on other other, government agencies or private business, because that's happening also in some private investment, in some public and private partnership investment that has happened in several countries where the financing is clearly related and correlated with the particular investment. And so I think to make sure that the countries receive the value for the money they're investing in, there should be a competitive procurement process.
We'll take one last question from the gentleman over there.
Thank you. My name is Dyson Maruzio. I'm from Zimbabwe. I want to make a follow-up on your earlier comments. You referred to the concerns about Zimbabwe's reluctance to liberalize the exchange rate, and you have also previously expressed concerns about the quasi-physical activities of the Central Bank of Zimbabwe. In just less than 3 weeks ago, the Central Bank governor said that in 2005, when they cleared the arrears to the fund, there was an understanding that there was going to be restoration of its voting rights. He says that this didn't happen. He also says that I think there is consensus that if the same kind of conditions that are being asked of Zimbabwe were applied to the other countries, probably half of them would not be actually benefiting from lending or support from the IMF. I wonder whether you would care to comment on that.
Well, my comments are quite simple. I think the most important comment is that Zimbabwe deserves better than it's having today. Zimbabwe, with its own economic potential, deserves to be among the best growing economies and the fastest growing economies in Africa today. It's not the case, and that's really the most important thing for me. And I will continue calling for a different set of policies. We need a comprehensive policy package in place, including those I mentioned earlier. Second, to address the specific question you asked, the restoration of the voting right is a decision of the board. It's been recommended by staff. The board did not decide on it, and so we just take note of that. And thirdly, I think all the countries that are receiving financing from the fund have to meet a certain number of conditions, and they have all met those conditions, and that's why they have received those financing. And so I think that statement is certainly an exaggeration by Governor Gono. So I think I'd like to conclude this session by saying that we are really living through a very exciting period for the continent, and it's happening. Yes, because of a commodity boom. It's happening because financing are going to Africa. But it's also happening because the conditions are changing, because countries are conducting different set of policies, and they are clearly addressing the weaknesses of the economies. And so I think we need more of the same. We need an acceleration of growth, and obviously we need to continue improving the environment for business in Africa. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dechane, Mrs. Christensen, Mr. Krieger, and Mr. Lisondo, and thanks all for coming.